So there was a group of students at Stanford, and they were given a design challenge of improving technology in third world environments. And the challenge they were given were specifically incubators in Nepal, in the third world. And the challenge was, okay, we hear that there's a high mortality rate among infants in the third world, and the presumption was, let's go build a cheap incubator. The assumed problem was, that the students assumed was, okay, well, this is the third world, probably the infrastructure isn't all that great, probably they don't have incubators to keep the babies warm, or if they do, they're broken, they have a hard time getting parts, but our suspicion is they just can't afford these incubators. And so they started on the design challenge, and the professor was like, wait, where's your direct experience here? And they're like, well, what do you mean? They're like, where's your direct experience? Have you talked to doctors, nurses in the field in third world countries to check up your assumptions? And they're like, no. So they got on a plane, went to Nepal, rural Nepal, went to a hospital, said, hey, we're here to build better incubators for you. The doctor's like, okay, great, they're over there. And they looked at him and were like, well, there's a whole wall of incubators. What's wrong with the incubators? So one, they're like, great, they have incubators. That was a surprise. Number two, what's wrong with them? Because we don't see any babies in them. And the staff there said, oh, the incubators are totally fine. They work great. But the babies never make it here from the field in time to put them in the incubator to make a difference. So in that moment, they got data that was a complete reframe on what they thought. They thought the problem to solve was incubators were too expensive. And what they realized was the problem was the incubators are fine, but we don't have a solution for the 2 to 3 hours it takes the babies to make it from the location of birth to the hospital where they can be saved. So knowing this, they're like, okay, well, let's go out into the field. Let's go way out into the rural areas and look at what's going on. So they watched births, they understood the dynamics of what was happening, and what they realized was, we don't need a cheap, fancy incubator in a hospital. We need this. It's basically like a sleeping bag. So the reframe was, the problem is we have to keep the babies warm for 2 to 3 hours to get them to the hospital. If we do that, problem solved. So they built basically what looks like a sleeping bag for a newborn. Wrap it in there. There's a little gel pack that you boil. Put the gel pack in there. Good for 2 to 3 hours to keep the baby warm on the way to the hospital. So they built a few prototypes of this because, again, even the reframe knowing, this is the solution, wasn't good enough. So they built a bunch of prototypes to figure out, okay, is this going to work? Built prototypes, put them out in the field, zero efficacy. Didn't work at all. And they're thinking material science is like, oh, is the fabric wrong? Did the gel pack fail? They go back out and they realize, no, why it's failing is the mothers are refusing to put their babies in the mobile incubator. And I'm like, what in the world is that? There's a perfectly good solution. It's cheap, works great. Why in the world, moms, are you not using this? Well, you might also wonder, why in the world is there, in something that's supposed to be thermally complete, basically a window that is this huge area for heat to leave the sleeping bag? Well, in their culture, unless the moms can see the heart area of the baby, they were presuming that these bags were going to kill the kids. And that was a cultural artifact. That in the West, we totally missed that cultural artifact. So by making the solution much more ineffective thermally, it dramatically increased usage of the product. So sometimes get ourselves in our perfect engineering brains and we think, oh, it's all about we didn't build the solution perfectly. Now the reality here of why this initial prototype failed was they didn't have complete empathy for the moms and the social context and the cultural context of what they were building. So this device now has saved, I believe, about 200,000 or 300,000 kids in rural areas and helping them get to hospitals in time for medical attention. So this is the power of empathy, of doing research in the field to really understand the underlying problems, social context around the problem that you're trying to solve.